Opening the flank, this aims to restrict black's central expansion and quickly contest the queenside. Developing a knight, this skirmisher prepares to contest central squares and potentially launch an early kingside assault. Solidifying the center and preparing for kingside development, this knightly advance aims to control key squares without committing prematurely. Opening the queen's diagonal is a sound idea, preparing for d5 and solidifying central influence. Central pawn thrust boldly claims space, creating a symmetrical pawn structure and opening lines for potential piece activity. Asserting immediate diagonal pressure, black pins white's knight, aiming to disrupt harmonious piece development. Solidifying the center and allowing for kingside development, this step subtly prepares for a potential castling maneuver. Challenging white's central pawn structure, black aims to create immediate counterplay and disrupt white's development. Securing the knight for a potential queenside buildup, this move subtly prepares to contest the d-file and offers a temporary retreat if black's central pawn push becomes too aggressive. Black confronts the center, immediately challenging white's pawn structure and opening lines. Challenging black's bishop directly aims to disrupt their piece coordination and potentially gain a tempo. Conceding the bishop pair here surrenders crucial central influence and opens a path for white's queenside expansion. Restoring pawn structure allows for easier piece development and control of central squares. Breaking the central pawn chain unlocks queenside dynamism, but be mindful of white's knight outpost. Opening the central d-file now offers white a clear avenue for piece activity and potential pressure on black's queenside. Opening the d-file for your rook is a good start, but that pawn on c4 might become a long-term weakness. Reclaiming the pawn with the bishop solidifies central control and prepares for a swift pawn advance. Re-establishing knightly pressure and eyeing the central pawn structure, black aims for dynamic play. Securing the knight on d4 and preparing kingside castling, this developing move calmly reinforces white's central presence. Securing the monarch in the corner is a wise precaution, preparing for future action. Castling secures your monarch, a fundamental priority, while preparing to connect your rooks for future action. Preparing to unleash the bishop on the long diagonal, this maneuver aims to improve its scope and potentially challenge white's central pawn structure. Aims to improve queen mobility and pressure the queenside, while carefully eyeing potential pawn advances. Opening the diagonal for the bishop prepares an active role for the piece, potentially pressuring the center or controlling key squares. Activating the rook on the d-file significantly increases pressure on black's center and potential pawn weaknesses, while also preparing for potential future pawn pushes. Securing the knight's escape square frees the f6 pawn for potential pawn breaks. Targeting black's queen's bishop and pressuring the knight creates immediate tactical skirmishes. Reinforcing the kingside's security takes precedence here. Launching a pawn avalanche, white aims to shatter black's pawn structure and seize control of the center. Challenging white's kingside pawn structure, this move seeks to disrupt coordinated pieces and potentially open lines for counterplay. Unleashing a pawn storm, white seeks to break open lines and exploit the exposed black monarch. Opening the f-file creates immediate threats, but exposes the dark squares around black's king. Exchanges the bishop, aiming to exploit black's doubled pawns and open up lines toward the king. Reclaiming the pawn re-establishes material balance, but opens the e-file for white's rooks. Repositioning the rook to the open file immediately challenges black's queen and activates white's most potent attacker. A tactical lightning strike, this knight daringly penetrates the white camp, threatening mate and disrupting white's queen placement. Sacrificing the rook opens a decisive diagonal for the queen and exposes black's king. A daring exchange, snatching a piece, but it leaves your king dangerously exposed. Sacrificing the rook opens a decisive diagonal, targeting the vulnerable king and disrupting black's coordination. Snatching the pawn opens lines, but leaves your king dangerously exposed as white masses pieces for an assault. Clearing the king's escape route with this check simplifies to a winning endgame. Surrendering the king's shield invites immediate threats to the monarch. The king's forced march opens vital diagonals and prepares a decisive attack on the weakened queenside. King's safety is paramount. This retreat solidifies the monarch's position amidst the unfolding tactical storm. Gaining control of the e-file, the bishop now pins the knight and prepares a decisive advance. Reclaiming the open file and centralizing the rook is crucial, but coordinating the remaining minor pieces should be the priority before committing the king further. Unlocking the d-file now creates immediate central pressure, forcing black's bishop to a defensive posture. Re-establishing the bishop's post on c8 offers a safe haven, potentially preparing for future queenside expansion once the immediate rook menace is dealt with. The rook returns, aiming to exploit the open f-file and pressure the weakened king. Unveiling the rook's open file, a bold sacrifice to disrupt white's coordination and potentially reignite black's chances. Capturing the bishop opens a critical path for your rook to invade and exert pressure. Repositioning the rook to contest the open d-file is essential, preventing white's pawn advance and preparing counterplay. Seizing the open file with the rook drastically improves its active potential, threatening the lone black king. Reclaiming the pawn initiates a simplified exchange, aiming to exploit white's exposed king and central pawn majority. Capturing the pawn opens a dangerous diagonal for white's rook, threatening the black king. Reclaiming the pawn is vital, as the knight now eyes a powerful outpost on c5 or e5. Securing the kingside pawn chain provides a crucial defensive barrier. Unleashing the knight to harass the rook and disrupt white's queenside consolidation. Securing the queenside, the rook advances, eyeing immediate pressure on the black pawn structure and creating potential tactical motifs. Seeking counterplay with a tempo-gaining knight fork, aiming to disrupt white's centralized king. Forcing the exchange simplifies the position, clearing a path for your rook to dominate the open file and hunt down pawns. Reclaiming the captured pawn, black initiates a favorable rook exchange, simplifying into a winning endgame by activating their king. Repositioning the rook to create potential queenside pressure and guard the pawn. Recapturing on f8 allows the white rook to dominate the 7th rank and begin its decisive march. Repositioning the rook to a more active file aims to harass the black king and exploit the awkward pawn structure. Reclaiming the rook to a more active square solidifies black's pawn structure and prepares for potential counterplay. Centering the king prepares for active participation in the endgame, aiming to support the rook's advance. Asserting kingside initiative with this royal check, black seeks to disrupt white's king safety and create counterplay. Protecting the king's escape squares becomes paramount as the pawn endgame looms. Unleashing the rook to harass the white king, this check aims to disrupt any semblance of king's safety before white can consolidate. Safeguarding the monarch by stepping back acknowledges the looming threats posed by black's active pieces. Securing the king's safety becomes paramount as the doubled pawns offer defensive support. Solidifying the king's shield, g3 fortifies against any potential checks marching down the open files. Shifting the rook to the queenside creates an active defense, aiming to untangle its pieces from white's imposing pawn structure. Unleashing the rook allows the monarch to participate actively in the ensuing middle game skirmishes. A timely repositioning of the king to a slightly safer corner, out of the rook's immediate sightline. King's advance opens new attacking avenues, aiming to disrupt black's coordinated pieces and exploit the weak king's position. Aggressively targeting the newly created open file forces a difficult decision for white's king's safety. Pushing the king into this discovered attack is a bold but likely losing gamble for white's king. King's safety deteriorates rapidly as the black monarch attempts to escape the onslaught. Prioritizing the central king's safety over pawn acquisition proves wise given the active opponent. The king's safety is paramount. Tucking him away from the open file offers a welcome respite from the looming pressure.